again today. It's a treat to be back with you. If I didn't meet you last week, I'm Christy Holden, and I am the pastor and director of Gulf Coast Wesley Foundation, which is housed at FTCU and also serves students at Florida Southwestern. And so thank you so much for being who you are, because you make us possible. And that is an awesome thing. There are a number of college students or recent graduates who are here this morning, and so I'm grateful to them. And I'm just going to give a quick shout out to Jocelyn Arco, who is visiting this morning with us. And next time, you can hear her preach, because she's called to ordain ministry and has been preaching and representing Wesley this summer and leading in mission and ministry in the Bahamas. And so I just am grateful that she's here especially, along with all Thank you for your presence. So last week we talked a little bit about Millennials and Generation Z, the students who are just graduating from college and the ones who are coming into college at this point or coming into young adulthood at this point. We talked a little bit about what the trends are, about their preferences and kind of the way they think and the way they make decisions a little bit. And today we're going to talk a little bit more about how to communicate with people across generations, and really how to communicate with people spiritually that are in any way different than we are, right? Because really the principles are the same. Whether you're talking about someone who is much younger or older than you are, or from any kind of group or experience that's different than yours, the techniques are the same. So I want to give you some tools to do that this morning, and that's where we're headed. So sometimes I think it's really, really helpful to acknowledge the obvious. I'm going to start there. I'm not ruling. In case you, I can't do that ponytail thing. He does that so well, and I never look good in Birkenstocks. But he rocks them. And so one of the interesting things that we were laughing about this morning is that even in the way that the service flows these last 2 Sundays, you'll notice that I do it different than he does, right? I do it a little different. So you'll hang with me, right? Yeah. You love me anyway, right? Yeah. I'm going to love you anyway, right? And if I mess something up, you're going to look at me and go, no, do the whatever it is, right? Okay, all right, we're going to get through this because the work of ministry, we're in this work together. Right? Right? Okay, so it is the same when we encounter people who are new to the church, new to our communities of faith, new to our circles or our friendships, people who we don't know very well, people who we know really, really well but haven't talked about Jesus with. All those conversations have the same risks and awkwardnesses about them, right? As it does to have a guest preacher on a Sunday. And things don't fit just exactly where we think they ought to fit. So sometimes I think it's helpful also to show how we ought to be by learning how we ought not to be. So here's a little clip that should be fun and a good scoop and helping of how not to be.
Oh, jeez, look at this. Reverend meathead. Get up! I'm up. Get out of the car! What are you doing? Sit your pants, get him on, you huh? I can never depend on you for the whole. What are you doing here? You put your pants on over your pajamas.
It's all right. It'll be cold on the boat. I don't have any warm underwear.
Oh, just hurry up.
Shush.
Why are you shushing me?
I don't want to wake up Gloria.
Gloria ain't there. She's downstairs.
What's she doing downstairs?
She's sitting in the chair down there. She's all right.
How do you know?
She told me.
What'd she say?
She said I'm all right. I don't hurry it up,
Oh, I
please.
was worried about her. Last night she wouldn't talk to me. It was like there was a pane of glass between us.
You know that we don't catch that fishing boat. There ain't gonna be no deep sea fishing. We'll have to stay on the dock at the old people. Hold it. What are you doing here? What? What about the other foot? There ain't no sock on it. I'll get to it. Don't you know that the whole world puts on a sock and a sock and a shoe?
I like to take care of one foot at a time.
That That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
It's just as quick my way.
Wait a minute, that ain't the prank. You see what I told? Don't keep doing it. Listen. Suppose there's a fire in the house and you gotta rub your leg. Your way, all you got on is one shoe and a sock. My way, you got on a sock and a sock. You see your reason?
Suppose it's raining or snowing outside. Your way, with a sock on each foot, my feet would get wet. My way, with a sock and a shoe on one foot, I could hop around and stay dry.
I think you've been hopping around on your head. Wait a minute, listen to me. Supposing the other sock's got a hole in it.
Doesn't have a hole.
I said supposing
All
it's
right,
got a hole.
suppose it has a hole.
All right, it's got a hole in it, so you ain't got another matching pair, so what are you gonna do? Your way, you gotta take off a whole shoe and a sock. My way, all you gotta do is take off one sock.
All right, if it'll make you happy, I'll start all over again.
No! Halfway through now, gee, get on with it, we're in a hurry. We can start doing it the right way tomorrow morning. And do it that way for the rest of your life.
So listen to what Paul says. Listen to what Paul says. Paul says, if then there is any encouragement in Christ, if there is any consolation from love, any sharing in the Spirit, any compassion and sympathy, then make my joy complete. Do you hear his pleading? Right? Even if you can't do it for Jesus, who ought to be enough, do it for me. Please. Don't do that. Right? He's saying, be of the same mind, have the same love, be in full accord, be with the mind of Christ. There are a couple things I want us to notice about that video. So talk back to me just a little bit. If you were the son-in-law in that scene, what would have been the most offensive or the most irritating moment for you? Mm-hmm. Being called a name, yeah, being called names, me good. Yeah, right? Nobody likes to be called names. Somebody at early service said, being woken up. Right? That's a serious Gen Z thing. So you already get this. That's so good. Yeah.
He put his clothes on over his pajamas.
So if you were the son-in-law, you would have been offended that you got called out for that?
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's an adult. He could dress himself.
Well,
Like,
it looks
kind of
funny.
however he wants, right? Yeah. Okay, so here's the bigger quiz, right? Where was the moment of ministry? Where was the door open for the Holy Spirit to be used in ministry in that scene?
Talking about his wife.
Yes. Because in the middle of all of that tirade, right? In the middle of all of that, he says, I'm worried about my wife. We had this big fight last night. There were hardly words between us. I really need to check in. That's where his heart is, right? He flung the door wide. But Archie is so focused on how things ought to be done and that they weren't happening in the way he thought they should happen, and making sure he could communicate and convey the ways of tradition that he felt were most important. He slammed that door shut, didn't he? He slammed the door shut. He had this beautiful moment in which to speak and witness grace and coaching and mentoring, all that good stuff that we talked about last week, right? But because he was so fixated upon his stress about things not being exactly how he planned or how he hoped or how he thought they should be, and that the son wasn't doing it the right way, he missed the ministry moment for me. Yeah. That can happen for us in the church. Now, we don't think that it happens because we like us, right? We think that we're nice, and mostly we are. We have fun with us, right? When you get together with your friends at church, you like having coffee with each other, and you feel welcome, don't you? Don't you? It's a good thing, right? And so we have no natural frame of reference outside of self-checking against the Holy Spirit to wonder whether or not we are as welcoming and loving and easy to get along with people we haven't met as we are with people we know and love and are comfortable with, right? It's a little bit of a different situation. And so even though we don't mean it, our internal sense of the differences between people, our fears about people who are not like us or people that we don't know very well, sometimes becomes an obstacle and gets in the way, and even comes out in our actions a lot louder than we think we're communicating those thoughts, right? Sometimes our internal emotion of fear and anxiety betrays us when we go to meet with people that we don't know, or to have conversations with people that we're unfamiliar with. As a campus minister, one of the things that I really love is that we have a close team. Our team of other campus ministers across the conference and across Florida is pretty tight-knit. We share a lot in common. We share a lot of ideas. We pray for one another and really support each other, and I love being part of that kind of a team. And because of that, we often get opportunities to respond as a team to different requests or conversations that are happening about ministry around the conference. And one of those is an ongoing conversation we have with youth directors at our churches who want to see the continuity go from youth ministry into collegiate ministry or young adult ministry, and then on to deploy young adults who've been formed by the church back to lead and serve local churches, right? So we get feedback about those things, and what we find is that there's a big drop-off point between youth ministry and collegiate ministry. There's a big drop-off point. A lot of times churches just don't even know that we have Wesley Foundations, or even that there are campus ministries at college. To some of their students too, and so that's one reason I like traveling to the churches, because I get to tell you that stuff. But also, there's another big drop-off point after collegiate ministry, because there is a disconnect in the local church from where the students are when they graduate from college. So here are some stories that I've heard in many cases and repeatedly from young adults who are coming back into the community to serve in local churches. One person said this: when I graduated, I went back home hoping to use my new professional skills, right? Here's a person who's just earned a cutting-edge 4-year degree in some field, right? I wanted to use my professional skills to help my home church. So I talked to my church about leadership opportunities, and I was told that I could keep the nursery and look after the children there, or I could volunteer with the youth group. Do you hear the disconnect? Not saying anything about the value or importance of nursery and youth ministries, because those are exceedingly important. And if that was your spiritual gift, awesome, right? But this is a person who wants to use their new training. They want to use their degree to help the church. Now, stop and think for a minute. If you had a person who just came out of a 4-year degree with an expertise in social media and marketing, like an advertising person, right? A communications type of a person with huge skills in those areas. Could your church use that? Could you stand some help with marketing and some expertise with how to communicate better? Yeah, right? What about a person who comes out of college with a business management or business administration degree, or maybe a hospitality and events planning degree, right? We actually just encountered a recent graduate who has an events planning, hospitality management background, and really wants to use her gifts and feels unfulfilled in her day job. So she's going to come and help Wesley and use her spiritual gifts and her training, her professional skills on campus. And I sorely need that help, so I'm thrilled. But how often we end up dismissing people thinking they look too young to be very trained in anything, right? Or they look very much like our own children, or maybe they even are our own children and they're coming back home. That sometimes can even be harder, because it's very difficult to make that transition to seeing them as adult peers that we can coach and mentor and support, as opposed to our child or grandchild return home. So that's a common story. Another example, this came from a clergy friend of mine who had this happen in his local church last year. A student came home with a degree in finance and accounting. He volunteered to be on the church finance team, which the church approved, and he began to help them. Got to the first meeting, got all the spreadsheets, gathered all the information, and the conversation at the table was that the church was having a really hard time balancing its budget and funding its ministry. So he took all that information home and he really poured over it, did a bunch of research, and tried to come up with some solutions for that. When he came back to the next team meeting, he gave 5 or 6 ideas for how they could solve those problems and what initiatives they could start in order to fill the gap between what they wanted to do and the money they had to spend. And every single time he opened his mouth with an idea, the rest of the team went, "Oh no, that'll never work, that'll never work. You don't know Bob and Jane and Sarah that work with such and so, and they're never going to stand for that, so we can't do that. No, that won't work either, that won't get, nobody wants to participate in something like that. You know they don't drive after dark." And no, you know. And so like with everything, there was an excuse. Till he felt so defeated, he left the church. Now this family, this person, was part of a longer chain of people, a longer lineage of people who'd been part of the church for a number of generations. And every extended member of his family was a corporate executive in a very large company in that community. And he was also working for that company. And so, what do you think went out the door when he went out the door? All that giving, right? All that giving. They didn't do that intentionally. It wasn't an intentional lashback at the church. It was just, I don't have a place here, so I'm going to go find a place where I can serve and use my gifts and be the person God called me to be. But then look what the church lost. Not just the coaching and the skills and the contribution, but also the money that went with that. And that's another one. You know, so often we look at our college students and say, oh, they're 20, they must be poor. Many of them are. But some of them aren't. Some of them aren't. Some of them have access to great resources. Some of them just landed a killer first job and would be having their first opportunity to learn what stewardship is and to tithe for the first time in full and to enjoy the gift of being a giver instead of always on the receiving end. Don't underestimate the gifts that are in the people that come to you. The last one is similar. Really doesn't matter what the age group is, but I hear this a lot from young adults. I came to church and people made it really clear to me that they didn't like fill in the blank about me. They didn't like my hair, they didn't like my tattoos, they didn't like my piercing, they didn't like my partner, whoever I'm dating. They didn't like whatever it is about me. They made it extraordinarily clear. I hear things like, they looked at me and walked in a big arc around me so they didn't have to come close, right? They gave me the stink eye when I sat in their seat and didn't know it, right? Right? And sometimes we do those behaviors without even thinking. Our internal self is not even registering that self-awareness of our responses to people. And they disrupt our status quo a little bit. A number of years ago, I went to visit my mom. I had a Sunday off, which at that time was very unusual because I was preaching in a local church still. And I went to go visit her at her home church. She worships in a United Methodist church in the Clearwater, Largo area. And her pastor is always using humor to help his congregation, and I love that about that guy. I wish I could be as good at it as he is. But I will never forget the announcements that Sunday. I remember nothing of the sermon. I just remember the announcements that day. And he got up and he asked the congregation a question. Tell me, of all the jobs that a pastor has to do, what's the hardest job? What's the hardest part of my job? And they're saying things like, oh, deal with grouchy, complaining people. Go to the bedside of a sick person in the middle of the night. Take an unexpected funeral and have to change your plans in order to accommodate a family in need. They're listing off. Try and organize all those meetings. Be away from your family a lot. They're naming all these things. And he said, yeah, those are hard, but not nearly as hard as finding parking attendants for Easter Sunday morning. That is my hardest job. And they're going, really? Why is that? And they're sort of laughing, but not knowing why. And he said, because I get reports for the rest of the year about what you people do to those volunteers. And he starts naming off, right? Some of them even say that you tried to run them over because they will not let you park in your normal spot. And he's going off on this whole thing about how badly people are behaving toward their own peers who are volunteering to do this Easter Sunday parking. But then he says this, here's the reason we need those volunteers. Because on Easter Sunday morning, a whole bunch of new people come to church. They're people who've never been here before, or maybe they've been here once or twice a long, long time ago, or maybe we got lucky and they came last Christmas, and so it's just been only a couple of months. But whatever it is, they're unfamiliar, and they need help parking and getting into the building and finding a seat. And I need you to know, we want these people, right? And he's laughing. He's going, we like these people. So please, when the parking attendant tells you to go down this aisle instead of that one, follow directions. And the whole congregation's like dying laughing, but isn't that the truth, right? When our way gets disrupted, sometimes we're unaware of how stubborn we can be and how set in our ways and patterns and the right way plans in our mind that we have. Paul reminds the Philippians in this text, do nothing from selfish ambition. Do nothing from selfish ambition. Now, the Greek there is the word eritheia, and that's just a common, would have been common at that time, an encouragement, an exhortation to the community to be civil to one another. Just be nice, right? We try to make grace so hard sometimes. We try to make it drenched in all of these churchy, fancy words, and sometimes just kindness can be the biggest grace we can give to one another. Just decency to one another and thoughtfulness. Do nothing from selfish ambitions. And do a self-check. When you feel that anxiety begin to surge, like, you're not putting the socks on and the shoes on the right way. No, that's not how we do it. Or, Pastor Christy, that's not how Roy leads communion. You're messing it up. Right? But you probably will say today, I'm just warning you. When you feel that feeling, do a self-check. Is that about your need to have things the way they always go? Or is it that there really is a huge heretical issue on the table? Right? Is this a kingdom question? Or is it just different than you're used to? And when you do that, what you're doing is you're allowing the one who has the power to help you deal with your stuff. See, because what we do when we don't do the self-check is we take all of our junk and we hand it to the guest. And we ask the guest to handle our junk. And now we've double sinned against them, haven't we? Because not only have we not welcomed them and made them feel at home and comfortable, but we've asked them to manage our stuff. And that is something God can only do with us. Remember to do that self-check. There were some young women here last week that helped to lead worship, and I know they've been hanging around and doing some ministry and worshiping with Cornerstone lately. Rika and Megan were here, and I appreciate them so much. I've done a lot of leadership and a lot of ministry with them, and I'm so grateful that they had a chance to play and to sing last week. But they're people that I go to sometimes when I need to spy on the other side. You know those people? That you need to just confess and be open with and say, I don't know what they're saying, so can you tell me? Because I know they're not going to tell me. But you have those people, you do that with your kids, probably, right? Did they say anything? I think it went okay, but I can't tell. Did they really? You know those people, right? Okay, so they're some of those people for me. One of the things that they said is that they're hoping, or that they think that their peers would say. They think that their peers would say that they hope for a church that is authentic and sincere. They want a church that isn't disingenuous. So often my friends think that the church is disingenuous because it speaks all the time about unity, but it doesn't really care about that. In fact, it works to the other extreme. It works to make divisions. And we want to be part of a church. They're talking about their peers. We want to be part of the church that opens itself to conversations about hard questions, things around which generations of people have struggled about the authority of Scripture and social values, and where those two things meet. We want to have those conversations in a safe place, where it's okay if the people around the table have different opinions and think differently, and that we can all leave as friends. But that Christ and the Holy Spirit will be present with us in the middle of the conversations while we wrestle it out. That's a pretty potent statement, isn't it? That's not a small request of the church that they're making. But remember what we said last week. Remember what we said last week about Gen Z culture and millennial culture. 75% or more of these people want spiritual training. They want spiritual mentorship. They're looking for people with whom they can process their spiritual questions. And guess who those people are? Us, right? They're you and they're me. So we've got to get ready by doing that self-check work and that thoughtfulness stuff that we talked about at the beginning. We've got to be ready to be able to field the questions in loving ways that allow hospitality to rule the day, right? That love always reigns in the conversations that we have. Paul says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit. The word in the Greek there for conceit is kenodoxia. It comes from two root words, kenos and doxa. Kenos means empty. Doxa can mean opinion or appearance. Empty appearance. When we see the church divided, when we see the church in conflict like that and with no love in the conversation, when we see the church say it wants unity or say it wants hospitality, say it wants welcome, but not actually behave in that way, we have an empty appearance. Another translation even suggests that we're delusional. When we're conceited, we are delusional. We have a false image of ourselves, don't we? We think we're more important than we are. Or we think that the issue over which we feel most passionately is the only important issue that there is to talk about. We are delusional in false thinking. Eugene Cho, who wrote an article recently for Relevant magazine, said it this way: humility does not parade around in the skinny jeans of false piety. It does not parade around in the skinny jeans of false piety. We have to allow God to speak truth to us about ourselves if we're really going to be prepared to speak about God's truth to anyone else. We've got to be willing to do that. When I was in seminary, I got the privilege of being in several classes with Dr. Bob Tuttle. He's a world-known evangelist, a champion of the United Methodist tradition and evangelism within it, a theologian also, and just a phenomenal person. I was so blessed by being around him. But one of the things that I think was the most important of anything that he taught me, in terms of being able to talk with anybody and to be able to have conversations cross-culturally, is to be insatiably curious about people. People are awesome, right? Have you noticed? They're sort of stinky sometimes. They sin a lot. Sometimes they make a lot of a mess, but man, aren't they cool? People are great, right? And everybody has a story to tell and a perspective to take and an idea to offer and a spiritual gift to share. Everybody is a wealth of resources if we are willing to listen and dig and mine for those stories and ideas and resources, right? And so he said, if you listen well, people will naturally give you invitations. People will give you invitations to share the gospel. You notice in the film club today, I want to call him Meathead because he didn't even actually use his real name. Isn't that bad? Michael. Michael opened the door even though he was being attacked, right? Even though he was being yelled at, right? Even in the midst of that antagonistic spirit, he opened the door for something to happen. How much more then will people do that if we listen to them? And what kind of witness is it for us to listen to people well? Because what that suggests is that people have value to us. We impart value to people when we listen to them. We invite them to tell us their story when we ask questions more than we give answers. And so good listening is about the best transcultural communicator you can find. Because everybody wants to be heard. They want to be known. They want to feel valued. Bob Tuttle also talks about some others. He talks about the need to overcome. That is a universal human need. Whether you are from, no matter what country you're from, no matter your age group, and that is absolutely true for college students. We all have junk, right? We have a past. We have stuff in our life and our habits that we wish we could run away from, and we can never run fast enough. We have relationships that have gone bad, wrong, and all kinds of upside down that we don't know how to fix. And we need supernatural power to fix those things, right? We need help. And apart from grace, there is, we believe, not any other help that can help us overcome the way that the grace of Jesus Christ can do, right? We need that help to overcome. That's a universal need. And we need to understand our origin. People universally, no matter where they are in the spectrum of life, they want to know, where do I come from? And I think a huge part of that is really about understanding identity. Because you see, if I know whose I am, it's a whole lot easier to understand who I am. If I see myself as having been lovingly crafted, preciously made, valued by the one who made me, a gift to the world from the one who fashioned my cells in my mother's womb, right? Doesn't that give me a whole different sense of identity than if I have no story to insert with that question? This is one of those doors that opens for almost any people group. And last, the need for community. Right? You guys at Cornerstone, you know that better than almost any church I know. You understand what community is and how important it is. Right? We need to feel like we're approved of, that we belong, that there's a place where we can be unconditionally loved and just be who we are and not be alone. Now, whatever it is in all of that that connects most with a growing edge for you, maybe it's the idea of becoming more self-aware, evaluating your fears and your anxieties, learning to pay attention to the places where you're conceited. Maybe it's becoming a better listener and learning to pay deep attention to people when you feel inclined to talk or give answers to asked questions. Maybe it's that you need to pray for opportunities and courage to tell someone else about God's amazing works, to share with another generation of people, no matter what their age or their place in the strata of time and space on this earth, that you need to share the love of God with somebody. Maybe one of those is a growing edge for you. Whatever it is, we are called to do the work, whatever work it is, to do that work with God in order to prepare ourselves so that when the opportunity comes, we can share what we know to be true. We can open those ancient stories. We can tell the things that have been told to us and declare the goodness of God to all the generations. That is how we live with each other incarnationally, right? That we allow ourselves to be transformed even as we hope for the transformation of the world. It changes us as much as it changes anybody else. So let me share with you one last story about a college graduate. There was a grower. His name was Hans. He lived in Texas, and he was a good-spirited man, known for being fair to his workers and wanting to make life better for them, known for running a good, stable company that was profitable and successful. He was respected by his peers for miles and miles around, and had been in business for a number of generations. The farm had been passed from one to the next, right? His son had been attending Texas A&M, and this was the spring he was graduating, and he was excited that his son was going to come back home and take over the business just like he had when his father looked forward to welcoming him home with his agriculture degree. And so his son came home and he said, George, let me tell you, I've got all these great plans for how we're going to launch you in the business and how we're going to make this transition. I've been working on it for months, and I'm so excited you're home and I can finally share this with you. Let's get to work. And George just looked at him and went, Dad, no, wait, I really need to talk to you. I've been praying about it, and there's something I need to say. You see, George, while he was in college, got involved with some groups on campus that paid a whole lot of attention to things like the care of farm workers and justice for the poor and issues of poverty and oppression in general. And it changed George's heart about those things. But he realized he didn't know all that he needed to know in order to act on that knowledge. So he came home and he said to his dad, Dad, here's my plan for launching into taking over the business. I'm going to go out and work with the migrants for a year or two. And I'm going to live in the housing on our property that we provide for them. And it'll be cool because I speak Spanish fluently and I'll be able to talk with them and I'll get to know them and they'll get to know me and I'll get to learn what it's really like to do the day that they do, to have the life that they have. And they'll get to know me. And maybe, just maybe, at the end of that time, I'll have some real good ideas for how to move this company forward and how to take care of those people. That is the incarnational call of Christ on us all, right? We can't get there if we don't listen. We can't get there conceited or self-ambitious. We need God to do what only God can do to fix those things in us so that we can be open to admire the beauty of all of His creation and all of His people. And then maybe the door will swing open and we can speak words of grace in the gap, right? And we might just get lucky and get an invitation. Will you pray with me?